Candice, we've been at this podcast thing for a few months now. I feel like it's going well, but I'd love to hear your feedback on how I've been doing as your co-host.
I love to give you some feedback. So, the feedback that I have right now is that you're doing a fantastic job distributing our media outward facing, whether it be in social media, whether it be internally. I think that you're doing a great job telling all the world about our podcast. So, regardless if thousands of people are watching it or only 4 people are watching it, you're doing a good job distributing it out. So, I appreciate that because that's something I could still work on. The other thing that I actually like is that you are holding me accountable to doing my pieces of the podcast. So it's not just, oh, I have a podcast and Candice, you're there, but we're generally coming up with ideas together. So I really appreciate that you're keeping me accountable to make sure that I come up with my end of this bargain. But the best piece of feedback, and I will say, is that outside of your normal job, you do a lot of the editing of our podcast. And so I appreciate you doing that heavy lifting because I didn't tell you this, but I used to do a lot of video editing. And I didn't want to tell you because I don't want to do it. So that's the feedback that I have for you, Chris.
Thank you for the feedback, Candice. I asked you for that, one, because really wanted to know. We actually haven't talked about this outside of the podcast. We've been just kind of plowing ahead. But I also want to have a candid conversation today about the art of feedback and sort of building a culture of feedback in our organizations. And so what that was is we modeled a feedback framework that you and I are both really familiar with, where it's this idea of feedback being a gift, in that you're either giving that gift or you're receiving that gift. And so I asked you for feedback because I wanted to know. And then you're giving that to me. And if you notice at the end of your feedback, instead of me responding to particular things or giving more detail about those specific things, I just said, thank you for the feedback.
Yes, that phrase, thank you for the feedback, is very important in our feedback model.
Yeah. So what does that do? Like, why do we tell people you should just say thank you for the feedback?
It allows you to not necessarily get defensive and rebut what happened, but to take time to reflect on it. So you're appreciating the gift. And if you would like to have clarifying questions or ask things later, that's okay. But the goal is to just accept the feedback, thank them for it, and move forward.
And it gives you that pause, right?
Mhm.
There's always probably some truth in it. There's probably some non-truth in that feedback. You just need to figure out what parts of that feedback you're going to use for yourself, but stopping yourself from getting defensive, especially if it's negative feedback or
Right.
constructive criticism.
Yes, if it's constructive criticism, I will say that it takes some time to learn how to understand that you can filter out some of the feedback and you don't have to act upon all of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's best if you just thank them and move forward.
Right. We have a colleague who uses the analogy of, if anyone has seen A Christmas Story, and the boy Ralphie's aunt gives him the bunny outfit.
Yes, the
pink bunny outfit for Christmas. Sometimes people give you gifts that you don't ever use, and they can just stay in the closet, or they can go to Goodwill or whatever it might be. Just because someone has given you feedback doesn't mean you need to wear it for the rest of your life.
Agreed. So what specifically I think about when I think about feedback is the first time that someone introduced this concept to me, they told me about the feedback sandwich. So this was like decades ago. Have you heard about the feedback sandwich?
Yeah, it's right after lunch. I'm glad I had lunch because you're kind of making me hungry. But yeah, I have heard about the feedback sandwich. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So it's also sometimes referred to as the feedback cookie, but they give you praise and then they give you that constructive criticism, whatever the meat would be. And then they follow it up with another piece of bread, which is positive feedback. So it's positive, constructive criticism, and then more positive.
Why would someone do that?
They want you to leave feeling happy. And I think people leave feeling more confused. So if I tell someone, hey, thank you for coming, and then, oh my goodness, you're a horrible person, I can't believe you did all these things, keep up the good work. That is not the best way to give feedback. It just doesn't feel authentic. It's literally just saying, yes, I like you. Yes, this is what you've done, but there's no specifics that are happening. There's no change. If you need to give constructive feedback, then do that. And you
Yeah.
don't have to then follow it up with, oh, I also like your hair. Like, I mean, whatever that
Yeah.
positive piece is.
It's kind of like the old Southern bless your heart.
Oh, bless your
Bless
heart.
your heart.
Yes.
And then you
Mhm.
say something really nasty about them, and then they go, oh, yeah, have a nice day. Right. It doesn't, there's cognitive dissonance there, and
Mhm.
it really confuses people, and they're not sure what to really accept as a part of that feedback. They don't know what's the genuine feedback. One of the things about feedback that we didn't talk about when we illustrated that model was the timing of it.
Mm.
It made sense that I was asking you for feedback now that we've done this for a couple of months, and it's still fresh. We're still doing this. It wouldn't have made much sense for me to ask you, like 4 years from now, if let's say we don't do this for the next 4 years,
Right.
and I was like, how was I as a podcast host? There's nothing actionable in it. So how do you recommend people uh, deal with timeliness and feedback?
So, especially when I'm working with my employees, it's good to do check-ins frequently for how am I doing, but also how they're doing. So, I like to remind people that I can get feedback too. I mean, I'm your supervisor, but I would like to know how things are going in both ways. So if the way that I'm communicating or the way that things are happening, if we can have a schedule. So I tell people that yes, we do quarterly check-ins or we do annual check-ins, but every other week is sometimes a good time for, is there anything else that I can be doing? Do you have any feedback for me specifically on what just happened or the goal that just there? So being able to be intentional about scheduling the time. However, if there is something that just happened, I don't wait 2 weeks to go, oh, we're going to meet in 2 weeks. I reach out immediately and go, I need to give you
Yeah.
feedback on what just happened. So if there was a crisis or something, it needs to be timely because if I go, oh, yeah, 2 weeks ago when that thing blew up, let's not do that anymore. That's not
Yeah.
appropriate timeliness for feedback.
Yeah, it's okay to sort of let yourself cool down a little bit, especially if it's sort of if you're having an
Hmm.
emotional response and you don't want to necessarily deliver the feedback emotionally, but you don't want to wait forever. I had a boss my first boss here
Hmm.
at the university. I would Everything would be just going swimmingly all year long. And then we'd get to the performance review time, and the performance review would be great, 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 hand slap. And I'm like, where did that come from?
Hmm.
Like, and it was something that I did 6 months ago that she didn't like, that she decided to save until my performance review. Like, why didn't you just say something to me then?
Yeah. And how did that make you feel, Chris?
It it always made She did it every single year. And I worked for this person for 17 years.
Mm.
I'm In retrospect, I'm not sure why. But it got me where I am, so I'm not complaining. The but it made me feel unvalued.
Now, were
Uh,
you able to give her feedback?
I didn't. So
Mm.
interestingly, before while that was happening, like, I didn't know about this feedback framework, right? I
Mm.
didn't
Mhm.
know about this feedback framework until I got into a leadership position, and this came from a leadership program that both you and I went through. And so there wasn't a culture of feedback there. When if I felt like I was being critical of my boss, that was not a safe space to be. I didn't
Mm.
feel like it would get that she would be open.
Receptive.
She wasn't being receptive to that feedback because we didn't have a culture of feedback. It was a very top down culture. It was a very my way or the highway.
Now, how will you how can people, the people that are listening to the podcast, how can they build a culture of feedback if that doesn't exist? How can they make it seem like I want to tell my boss this, but I don't want them to think that I'm trying to run the show
I
here?
think it comes from the leadership modeling that behavior. And
Mm.
so it is you very publicly asking your team members for feedback,
Mhm.
kind of helping them understand, hey, this is the framework. This is what's going to happen if you give me feedback. So if I'm regularly soliciting feedback from members, whether it's in our one on ones or sometimes I'll even put a question out in our, you know, our virtual spaces or whatever that's more public, people tend to give me feedback more often when it's just one-on-one. I think people are a
Mm-hmm.
little more comfortable with that. If I'm not reacting negatively and sort of immediately to feedback, that sets the example of this is how feedback works in our organization. And it happens all the time to me. Our team recently has had some challenges and struggles that I've had to address. And it's required me to be a little more direct with some of our staff in these are the expectations. And one of my other team members came to me in a one-on-one and said, "Hey, are are you maybe being a little too hard on the team because there's some people that are like
Mm-hmm.
like
Underperforming
that
or
well
not underperforming,
well
but
no it was they were feeling maybe I was being a little bit too harsh."
oh,
But
okay.
we have that culture where that people trust me enough to come to me and say, "Hey, Chris, you might want to back off just a little bit. You've got your foot too far down on that accelerator pedal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's you might be overreacting to our challenges a little bit." And I don't think that if we didn't have that culture of feedback, there's no way they would have ever come to me and told
And
me
been
that.
comfortable sharing
Yeah.
that with you. But what about from the bottom, or from not a leadership position? Is there a way to introduce a culture of feedback from within, from the team versus from the leadership?
I think one of the really interesting ways of doing that is making sure that when you get through a production cycle or you get a product out the door or whatever it is that your team is doing, that you have we call them postmortems in
Hmm.
IT, but it's really they're after action. Uh,
Yeah.
and if you have these after action events where you all come in and talk about this is how we did and these are the things we could have improved, that's an opportunity for everyone to give feedback in a safe space. It's like when you set the stage of this is a place where you can come and be honest so that we all get better together. We don't attack each other, right? We're not nasty about
Hmm.
anything, but we are being honestly constructive about how we can improve things. That's a way that you could build that.
I think that developing relationships is another way that you can encourage a culture of feedback. And I think that it really helps if you can be caring sometimes when you're giving candid criticism or candid information. So if you develop a relationship, it's easier to do that with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. You build that trust among the team and then they know that they're safe with each other. They know that there's caring involved and compassion involved here.
Yes. So there are, I do have some examples when we've had to give critical feedback or sensitive feedback to
Yeah.
individuals. And one of the things we haven't mentioned is there are appropriate places to give feedback, and
Yes.
sometimes there are
Yes.
not appropriate places to give feedback. One thing that we haven't mentioned is sometimes there's an appropriate time to give feedback, and sometimes
Yes.
the location of when you give it versus personal and private, or whether it's in a large group, really matters. And so, one of the things that I'm pretty sure that you agree with me is when you're giving constructive feedback is to do that in private. So that's not a time where in the group meeting that you're going to say, such and such, you need to fix X, Y, and Z, but that's something that you should be doing privately with your employees.
I completely agree with that. I think there are times when I think giving feedback in the moment matters,
Hmm.
right? If someone is exhibiting really bad behavior in the moment, you address the behavior in the moment and just
Yes.
stop the meeting and say, that's not acceptable
Hmm.
here. But if it's short of that, I completely agree that you just need to have that as a private conversation. The person's going to be much more receptive. They're going to be in a place. You need to do it soon, though, right?
Hmm.
You can't wait 6 months and then go, remember when you did that back in the meeting? You can't do that. One of the other things that we haven't mentioned yet that's really important to feedback is specificity.
Yes.
You really need to, if I come to you and say, Candice, you're a terrible person, it's unactionable. It's
Hmm.
completely unactionable. It's like, well, why? What did I do? Right. And so what I can say is if you've done something that perhaps has offended me or was poor behavior, what I really should do is so, Candice, can I give you some feedback? And you'll
Yes, I would like to have some feedback.
and it's Candice, at that meeting we were at last week, I feel like you attacked Bob in a way that you
Mhm.
shouldn't have done, right? You were overly aggressive with Bob, and that was unneeded.
Thank you for the feedback. Or that's what I would model.
Yeah,
And I think that on the flip side, the positive, when you're giving positive feedback, I actually dislike it so much when people go, "Oh, you did so great." I'm like, "Oh, what was great about it?" And they're like, "Oh, it's just great."
exactly, right? Specificity matters on both
Yes.
sides of that equation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Are there other things about feedback that you think are critical that we mentioned to the audience that we've not yet covered?
We've talked a lot about kind of direct person to person feedback, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of different ways that you can get feedback. One of them is doing 360s,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Right, we talked a little bit about that. We've gone
Can
through
you explain a
360s.
little bit more about what a 360
Yeah, so a
is?
360 is an opportunity for people surrounding you. That's where the 360 comes, the full
Mhm.
circle around you. They have the opportunity to answer a series of questions about you and give you feedback on your performance. And generally speaking, it'll be the person who manages you,
Mhm.
the people you manage, maybe some stakeholders in your organization, and then your peers. And what that does is it gives you this like full view of yourself from the perspective of others. And I've always found them to be incredibly valuable because we, as even if we're the most self-aware people,
Mhm.
and I think you and I are pretty self-aware, but even we don't see things about ourselves that we should. Like I've gotten such incredibly valuable feedback from 360s that I've used and taken action and improved myself as a result of, right?
Mhm.
It's people have given me really direct feedback in 360s. I had one of my direct reports once tell me, Chris takes all the fun projects for himself,
Oh,
right?
but at least that's valuable. You can work on that. You're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I can share the fun."
Yeah, and I did. Like I immediately said, "Oh, I guess I do that." So I started doling things out to other people that in creating those opportunities for them. I didn't it was
It didn't even occur to
it didn't even
you.
occur to me that I was
Mhm.
doing that. And so asking for that feedback was really important. How have you found 360s?
360s have been humbling, very much so. So I know that I'm a rock star, and I'm like, of course, everybody thinks I'm a rock star. And then but that's usually from like a supervisor because I hear feedback from them often, and then from the people that I supervise, it's like, yay. Then I hear from my peers, and they're just like, she all right. I was like, she's
Yeah.
mad. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
but it's specific that I can work on that because
Yeah.
at one point I was just like, I'm not going to listen to any of that. I'm going to just continue to do it by my way. But then I work and collaborate with these people all the time. So if this is what my peers are saying, then I should take in some of the feedback and use and filter what I can do and what I can't do about that. So,
Yeah, I don't think either of us need like a bunch of people telling us how great we are.
right.
Right? We do the 360s to get that constructive feedback. I had a boss in a previous job who like rated me a 5 on every single thing on
Hmm.
the 360. Like that's unuseful.
Yeah, I'm
Right?
like,
It's
thank you.
completely worthless. It's like I'm
Yeah.
glad you feel like happy about me, but like tell me where places where I can improve because we all have places for improvement.
Hmm.
Um, the the other place, and this is kind of a new thing for me, is figuring out how to use technology as feedback. And
Oh.
and by that I mean there's all these AI tools out there right
Hmm.
now
Oh, yeah.
and ChatGPT, Gemini, there's a bunch of different ones. And you can actually talk to them
I
and
have.
ask them questions.
Hmm.
And I have the pro version of ChatGPT on my phone. It's actually audio enabled.
Yep.
So I can have a real
Conversation.
conversation.
Yep.
And there's a new version of it out now that is so incredibly close to real conversation
Mhm.
that I can like be driving somewhere and have a conversation with this AI.
And to
Uh,
do a callback, you can use it to practice interviewing.
yes, exactly,
But
exactly.
continue.
But it can give you it's feedback in a different way. It's maybe not as specific as you'd get from talking to a human,
Mhm.
but you can bounce ideas off of it. You can say, "Hey, this is the situation that I'm in right now. Can you give me some ways that I might help remedy this
Mhm.
situation? This is the thing I've tried. What might have been wrong with how might that or I think this is a solution. Give me some feedback on the solution before I actually try the solution. And they're remarkably good at it.
I use AI conversationals for when I'm learning languages. So I do
Yeah.
talk to a lot of people online, just random people, but the time difference is really weird when I'm trying to
Yeah.
talk to people in Korean and it's 3 o'clock in the morning their time and
Yeah.
not here. So I use AI for those purposes to have those conversations. But it's very interesting that you bring this up about the feedback that I would be interested to see kind of the suggestions because when they come up with topics, when we're talking about getting coffee, they pull in information about the area that I'm in, like, oh, you want to go to, and they say specific places. So it
Yeah.
really feels like they know a lot about me.
Yeah, absolutely. I tried there was a software package that was essentially a like a core life skills building package. And,
Mhm.
and one of the things was, you were wearing VR headsets and everything, but you would necessarily need that. But it was practicing difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it all of a sudden, I put the headset on, and all of a sudden it pops up and it says, um, "Your employee Travis hasn't been coming to work on time, and he's not turning in projects. He's not completing his projects." And then instantly, three-dimensional Travis pops up in this VR headset,
Nice.
and he's angry at me already. And he goes, "I see you scheduled this meeting. What's it about?" And then I have to practice
Mm-hmm.
that
That,
that conversation with him. But the feedback part of this is after I finished the conversation, we talked about things like what might be causing his problems. Is he having challenges at home in his personal life that are,
mhm.
affecting these things? At the end of it, it said, "Would you like some feedback on how you did?" I'm like, "Sure." And it said, "You practiced empathy, but also had clear expectations for Travis," and so on and so forth. It gave me feedback. It allowed me to practice in this completely safe space because I
Mm-hmm.
think when we when we practice on our employees,
Oh yeah.
like that can be a bit of a dangerous
You've built
space,
that
right?
relationship.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
Yeah. So for new leaders and managers, AI can be this like incredible tool to give you feedback on and allow you to practice a little bit before you're actually using it on real human beings.
Thanks, Chris, for sharing that tip and tool that others might be able to implement or use. It's time for us to get real. Where do you still struggle when it comes to feedback?
I think it's sticking to the framework. The framework is tried and true. It actually works, but it's hard to do, especially if there's any emotion involved in the conversation or in the feedback that you get. And I will still want to respond and want to defend or depending on what the feedback is. Um, I also will sometimes, if someone's giving me positive feedback, I will try to confirm with them that, yeah, you're right, I'm great. And that's not a great thing for me to be doing. But it's specifically when it's negative feedback and I want to defend it. And I have one member of my team who's really direct with me. And I appreciate the fact that this person is direct with me. But there's a lot of times when his his feedback is there's a kernel of truth in the middle of it and there's hyperbole surrounding it. And I want to like break down the hyperbole. And that's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is for me to say, "Thank you for the feedback. I'll take it into consideration, go back and think about it myself, suss out what that kernel of truth is, and then act on that kernel of truth. And then maybe give him feedback at another time and say, "Hey, when you come to me with these things, you're bringing a lot of emotion in with it, right? You're bringing a lot of frustration in with it. Can we not have those things and just come with me with the kernel of truth?" Because I think almost every time you come to me, like there's something in there that makes sense, but I'm having a struggle in in really reacting the way I should because you're bringing so much extra to it.
Yeah.
So where do you struggle?
Well, I will say plus one to that. I definitely still struggle on letting it marinate and just saying thank you for the feedback. However, I think I'll share on the giving side. So, on the giving side of feedback, I still struggle with wanting to be liked, wanting to be everyone's friend or
Oh, yeah.
that piece. And so when you give constructive feedback, I'm not wanting people to walk out of the room crying, but at the same time, I'm like, well, I'm not good cop at this point. I am literally putting on a hat of we have to be serious and here are the expectations. And we're not going to be like, hey, let's go out for pizza right after this because that's not appropriate. And so that's, I guess, a piece where I have to focus on the behavior versus the person. And that's literally what I do when I'm thinking about giving feedback. And I just remind myself, Candice, focus on the behavior. This is how we can do this. It's not the person. This is how we're doing that feedback.
That's so difficult when you're giving constructive feedback to people, is that you really need to focus on that behavior. That's the critical piece of it, because otherwise it feels like you're attacking them as a person.
Agree.
And if you're in that mindset, then they may receive it in that mindset. And so it's being very specific about that and sort of compartmentalizing the behavior for both you and for them is really important. So as we wrap up today, Candice, can I give you some feedback?
Yes.
So I asked you for feedback on how I've been as your co-host. So I'd like to give you some feedback about how you've been as my co-host. And I want to lean towards the constructive criticism side.
Let's go.
So what I think that, and this might be related to the thing that you said you just struggle with. I think there are a lot of times when I say something and I can kind of see it in your face that you're going, Chris, you're full of crap. But you don't push me on it. Right. And so what I would like you to do more in the future, and I think would kind of make this even a better experience for us both, is push back on me when you don't agree with me. It's okay. That's part of what this Candid Conversations thing is about.
Thank you for the feedback.
All right. So great conversation today, Candice. Really appreciated this. Hope everybody got a good sense of what feedback is and how we use a feedback framework and how it really can improve your work culture if you have this open culture of feedback. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks.